Today we're going to be looking at relating fractions, decimals, and percents. And so remember, percent is a number out of 100, which means percents are ratios that compare a number to 100. So you're looking at out of, which means division. So a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So 45% means 45 out of 100, 45 over 100. Can this be simplified? Yes. So if you were asked to put a percent to a fraction, once you get to this position here, you would need to simplify it. And how do you simplify it? You simplify it by making an equivalent fraction. So finding a common factor that can go into both numbers. So for example, 45 can be divided by 5 as well as 100. So 5 goes into 45 9 times, and 5 goes into 120. So the answer to this would actually be 9 over 20 once simplified. So to give an example of that, I always like to reference to the easy one. So if you get stuck, you can always think of this in your head. How did I get there? And then use that for any other conversions you have to do with math. So to write a percent as a fraction, write the percent as a rate per 100. So 100 is always in the denominator to start because percent is always out of 100. Then you simplify by finding a common factor and making an equivalent fraction. So for example, here you have 50 over 100. In order to simplify that, what would you do? You would show me, okay, divide by 50, divide by 50. 50 divided by 50 gets you 1. 100 divided by 50 gets you 2. Once this is finished, that would be your answer. The answer would be 1/2. Fraction to a percent, so now you're going in the reverse. You're taking this fraction here and you're going to figure out if it's a factor of 100. If this bottom number 10 can go into 100, you can just make an equivalent fraction. So 10 to 100, well, how do you get there? Well, 10 times 10 gets you 100 and 6 times 10 gets you 60. So that means 60 out of 100, which is 60%. To change the fraction into a percent, how did I get from here to here? All you have to do is divide the 60 by 100, which gets you 0.6, and then you had to move the decimal place 2 times because it's times 100 to get you to 60%. But now that's not always the case. You're not always going to have the bottom number as an equivalent fraction. So if that's the case, then what you have to do is first convert that fraction to a decimal. So for example, let's just say here, yes, 5 can go into 100, but maybe you didn't see that. So what you can do is you take the top number divided by the bottom, so 3 divided by 5 gets you 0.6. Now that you're at 0.6, how do you get that to a percent? Well, a decimal to percent is just multiplied by 100 because percent is always out of 100. So times 100 would move the decimal 2 places, and then you would end up getting 60%. If you had a mixed number, anytime you have the whole number here, that needs to go as the whole number in a decimal. So 3 would be 3.2. Also keep in mind, if you ever see whole numbers, these are also over 100%. So 1 and 1/5 would be 100% plus 1/5. This right now says 300% plus 1/5. So going from decimal to percent, if you didn't know how to do that, I put that right here. How do you do that? You just basically write a number as a decimal into percent by multiplying by 100. So if you had 0.36, what you would do is times 100, which is equivalent to moving the decimal 2 places, because each place value is times 10 times 100. That gets you 36%. Keep in mind it is important to put the percent sign at the end, because if you don't, then we don't know what you did, and 0.36 and 36 are completely two different things. So if you had 0.9 as a decimal and you had to put this as a percent, again, decimal to a percent, you're going from 0.9, so what did you get? Times 100, you got 90%. If you got 1.45 decimal as a decimal, you had to put that as a percent. Well, then you times it by 100 still, move it 2 places to the right, that's 145%. So remember, if you ever see a decimal with a whole number, just know it's going to be over 100%. So converting a fraction with the equivalent of a 10, again, these are just like quick reminders to show you that you can go ahead, and if you have a digit of 10, it just means 6 in the 10th place. 16, you can only finish in the 10th place, so the 6 has to finish in the 10th place. 6 must finish in the 10th place. 6 must finish in the 10th place. So that's just a quick way to do mental math. If you see an equivalent of a place value on the bottom, whether it's 10th place, all of these say finish the last number in the 10th place. If it was 100, it would mean finish all the last digits in the 100th place, etc. So how do you go from a percent to decimal? All right, well, if you had 56%, what you have to think is, all right, percent is always out of 100. So what does that mean? That means technically 56% over 100, which means divide by 100. So now you're moving 2 places left, and then you get 0.56. So notice, if you're ever going from percent, think in your head, you want to get 100%. Percents are going to be the larger numbers. If you're going from the percent to a decimal, you're getting smaller, so you're going to divide. 2%, this is a common error problem, don't forget. It's still 2%. That means you only got 2 out of 100. The way I like to always think of this one is percent, so cents. You had 56%. How do you write 56 cents? 0.56. 2%, 2 cents. How would you write that? 0.02. So whenever you're going percent to decimal, I like to always think money, because money is written as a decimal. Percent helps you say how much you have. Decimal to a fraction, just as a reminder, you should know how to do this, but if not, again, if you have an equivalent of a 10, 100, and 1,000, you're looking at the place value here, so your last digit is in the 10th place, that means 6 over 10, and then you would need to simplify the fraction if it's asked. If they ask you to give you the fraction, then yes, you must automatically know to simplify it. What would this be simplified? 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the simplified version, the answer for this would be 3/5. If you're getting a mixed number, which is with a decimal, so you have a whole number, the whole number goes as your front number, and then the 2/3 goes as your fraction. And again, if I were to ask you then to go from decimal to fraction to percent, if you think about it, okay, 9.23, that's 900% plus 23 over 100. So if you look at it, if I wanted to go from decimal to percent, decimals are smaller, then I need to go to times 100. Boom, boom. This is 923%. You can also see that by 900% plus 23 of 100. So 900 plus 23 is 923%. All right, so then let's see what types of things can you do with these kinds of questions. Well, if you were given a number line like this, and they wanted you to identify 0% and convert it between, so now let's use everything we've just learned, you can see that 0% means 0 out of 100. As a decimal, it's written as 0. For part B, they give you 740, 7 out of 40. Okay, well, you have to go 7 out of 40. 40 is not a factor of 100, so I must do long division. So 7 divided by 40 gives me 0.175. Again, how would you go from decimal to percents? You times it by 100 to get me 17.5%, and that can also be written as 17.5%. 25%. What is that written as a fraction? Well, again, to go from percent to fraction, put it over 100. There it is as a fraction, and then you need to simplify it. So that's 5 over 20. It's still not simplified, so it's 1/2. What would this be written as a decimal? I'm sorry, 1/4. What would this be written as a decimal? 0.25. So again, these C and E would be good ones this whole A, C, E, G would be good ones to reference and memorize in your head so that if you ever get stuck on how to convert from a fraction to a decimal or percent, you can think in your head, how did I get there? So for example, if I had the fraction 1/2, in my head I'm thinking of a pie and I ate half the pie. Okay, well I ate 50% of the pie. Well, how did you get from 1/2 to 50% of the pie? Oh, I see. 1 divided by 2 got me 0.5. How do I get from 0.5 as a decimal to 50%? The number got bigger by 2 place values. Bigger means multiply. Times 10 times 100. So fraction to decimal, divide numerator by denominator, decimal to percent times 100. This one, 100%. 100% means you got 100 of them out of 100 correct. Yay! Now you got 100 out of 100. Now you need to divide that. Well, that is equal to 1. And again, that's the same as saying 1.0. Another thing you can get is comparing. So if you have to compare, you must convert to make sure that they are all the same. So do you want to convert 1/2 to a percent, or do you want to convert the percent to a fraction? I always like to convert the fractions so that you're eliminating having your LCD. So 1/2 I know as 0.5, and again that means 50%. So now I'm comparing 50% to 37%. Well, 50% is larger than 37, but that's not the answer. I must use the original. So in my final answer, I'm going to state that 1/2 is greater than 37%. Same with this one here. Again, you could have changed the 19%, but this one here, they changed the decimal to a percent. How do you go from decimal to a percent? Well, you times it by 100. So then you get 12.5% is less than 19%. That is not the answer. That is your work. So then you say, okay, well, what was the original? 0.125 is less than 19%. Same with if you were asked to order from least to greatest. You need to make sure that you get all of these to the same thing, whether you want to go fraction, percent, or decimal, and then compare. Well, what I would do is notice that I have a percent and I have a percent. Well, that saves me 2 steps, so I'm not going to touch those. I'm going to convert everything to a percent so that I'm only working with these 2 guys. All right, so how do I go from a fraction to a percent? Well, what you can do is you can either do top divided by bottom, which gets you to a decimal, which is 2.6, and then times 100 gets you 260%. 0.57, how do you go from decimal to percent? You times 100. So times 100 gets you 57%. Now I'm going to order my work pieces. I have 0.25% as my least. Then I have 57%. Then I have 260%. And then the largest is 300%. So now this is the comparing. This is the work step. That's not the answer. And now I must put the equivalent from what I was originally given as my answer. So 0.25% was in the original, drop it down. 57% it was equated to 0.57, drop that down. Then 260% was equivalent to 13 over 15, drop that down. And then 300%, drop that down. This would be my final answer. In word problems, they will give you things to talk about values. So the United States nickel was once made of 100% nickel. That means 100%. Every little piece of that nickel was 100%, okay, made of nickel. Today, nickels are 3 parts copper and 1 part nickel. So now you're not having 100%. What percent of the nickel is pure? So what you have to do is look to say, all right, well, what are you being given? So if you're given 1 part of pure nickel and then 3 parts of copper, well, 3 plus 1 make up the whole 100%. So that's how you get the total parts is 4. And out of the total 4, 1 of them is nickel. So then I have 1/4. 1 divided by 4, again, going from fraction to decimal, gives me 0.25. That's the decimal. How do I go from decimal to percent? Times 100. So that means that today's nickel is 25% pure nickel. All right, so let's look at some samples. So if you're given 34% and you are asked to convert it to both a decimal and a fraction simplest form, what you do is you put 34. What does that mean? 34%, it means 34 out of 100. So if you have 34 over 100, well, that means 34 in the hundredths place. So that's 0.34. Double check, is the 4 in the hundredths place? Yes, it is. So now you have your decimal. You don't have your fraction yet because that fraction is not in simplest form. So what you must do is convert this fraction, the 34 over 100, into simplest form. And so how do you do that? You find a common factor that can go into both. So divide by 2, divide by 2. And so 34 divided by 2 is 17. And then 100 divided by 2 is 50. What does this mean? This means that 34% equals 0.34 equals 17 over 50. So now if you got 1.5% and you were asked to put this into a decimal and into a fraction, well, when you put this into a fraction, again, if you think about it, 1.5 over 100 is not simplified all the way into what it would be as a fraction. So what you have to do then is go to a decimal first. So in order to go to a decimal, again, if you're dividing by 100, you're moving this place value 2 places. So then you get 0.015. Now that you have 0.015, you have your decimal. Use this decimal now to put it into a proper fraction. And how do you do that? Well, you look at it and say, what place value is that 5 in? That 5 is 10 hundredths thousandths. So that technically means 15 over 1,000. Now that's not simplified, so you must simplify the fraction. So divide by 5 would get you 3. And then divide by 5 on the bottom. 5 goes into 10 2 times, add the zeros, so then it's 3 over 200. 3 over 10, this here is written already as a fraction, and this time they want you to go to a percent with this. So if you had to go to a percent and to a decimal, what you can think of is 3 out of 10 means 3 in the tens place. So real quickly, that would be it as a decimal. Then to go from decimal to percent, all you do is times 100, and that would get you 30%. If you didn't go that route, you can also see that 3 over 10 is a factor of 100. So 3 out of 10, if you did times 10 times 10, then you get 30 out of 100, which is 30%. So there are multiple ways to do this. So you could do it that way. Why did I give you this problem? As an example to see that 30% is a lot different than 1/3. 1/3, if you recall, is 0.333 repeating. And when you have 0.33 repeating times 100 to go to a percent, it is not 30%. It is actually about 33.3%. And so it's a big difference. And note that by having 3 over 10, 3 in the tenths place, it's a lot different than 1/3, which is 0.333 repeating. All right, and then one last example. Let's just say you had -2/3, -0.7, 7%, and 0.62. And you were asked to put these in order from least to greatest. So least to greatest, okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to first say, what do I want to convert them all to? By looking at this, what do you notice? Well, I notice that I have a decimal here and I have a decimal here. So I'm going to go ahead and convert to decimals so that I'm doing less steps. And then keep in mind, you have to watch out for your symbols and your signs. So if you have a negative sign, that means furthest left on the number line. So if you're in more debt, you lost more. So let's go ahead and convert these to a decimal. Well, 2/3 is one that you should memorize. That's the other repeating decimal. So this is negative 0.666666 repeating, or what people like to say is about. This would be negative about 0.67. This here, again, we're going to drop it down to negative 0.7 because there's nothing to convert. 7%, well, how do you put that as a decimal? Remember, it's 7 out of 100. So divide by 100. That means move the decimal 2 places left. So then you're going to get 0.07, or think 7%, 7 cents. Okay. Then this one here, again, just drop it down because we didn't do anything with this. Now you have all your numbers. So you can think of it on a number line if you like, or you don't have to. But remember, the more you lost, the more debt you were in. So my lowest amount, would you want to lose 66 cents or would you want to lose 70 cents? Well, I rather lose 66 cents because losing 70 cents is lower on the number line. So because you lost more debt. So that's going to be the lowest one if you were to think of it on a number line. Down here would be negative 0.7. Now moving closer to 0, you're going to say, okay, next in line would be 0.66, repeating negative. So that would be 2. And then 7 cents, you're now above 0. So that would be 3. And then 62 cents, so 0.62, would be furthest on the number line, so that's your greatest. All right, so for the final answer, you actually do not use your work, you use your original. So my lowest one would be negative 0.7, comma. My second would be negative 2/3. My third largest would be 7%. And my fourth largest would be 0.62. And that would be the final answer.